Okay.
So I'll probably just say by myself, I'm just the son of Antonio Camacho Baza, and here I am.
Yes, well,
Open for
whatever,
questions, you know.
whatever you want to say. We do
But,
have a time limit, not more than an hour. If we,
Yeah,
if we
no,
can.
I
But-
think we could do this well.
Yeah.
I'd like to do really, like you asked me, but I thought that when I was talking to her, we kind of drew a little picture of what he was like.
Absolutely.
And so therefore, when we come to that 1950, you know, people are not living in a vacuum. You know, we live in before that time. You know, and I think my dad was a product, and many of the others, of the first decade of the American occupation.
Yes,
They were
it was.
really absolutely don't know Americans. They don't know where they're coming from in a sense. They don't know really why they're there. There was a war, and that's about it. And I think this is where my father was influenced by his father and other people. I think where we tried to survive, because there was Spain basically went bankrupt, could not support, and I think this is what caught this generation, my father, in the first decade. They were born there, you know. But their parents were all born during the Spanish days. They were all. My grandfather was 35 years old, 1900.
Okay.
You know, he spoke Spanish. That was his way of doing business. And now you change the language.
To
You just
English
killed all of
and,
them. You know,
yes.
and so therefore, really, I think my father's background basically was like trying to adapt to the American way, the language. The Americans use a lot of movies, you know, cowboys and whatnot. They grew up in silent pictures, you know, and that's their background up to that point. Kind of like, you know, they are Americans in Guam, but there is no social interaction. Americans have their own club in Guam, just as in Manila. My father told me they don't have social with the local. So I think my dad was in this situation where you're a young man and you're trying to figure out how you operate in this kind of environment, you know. And I think my father went to school in Manila. I think he learned a little bit more because Manila is a big city and an old city, you know, and very well organized. And my father mentioned that Ateneo was an elite school. One of his classmates became president of the Philippines, Quirino, in like 9th, 10th grade. They were together. So when my dad came here, it was not exactly, you might call it, you know, I think he was fairly sophisticated at what's going on in the world because of newspapers in Manila, you know, not much in Guam. And I think this is the kind of people that who will return to Guam, and they're kind of difficult to figure out. And now, you know, you can ask me really about 1950 area, you know.
Okay. Well, you know, I wanted to say thank you for coming and agreeing to be interviewed.
Yeah.
This interview is on behalf of the Judicial Arts and History Society of Guam. It's an organization that is comprised of people that are connected with the judiciary, to include the U.S. Marshals, U.S. Probation, the courts, U.S.
Yeah.
Attorney's Office, and the U.S. Public Defender's Office. And what we're trying to do is to preserve the history of the judicial from day one. And as you know, it was because we have such a small history, we wanted to interview people who had an instrumental part in building it up.
Yeah.
Your father, Marshal, U.S. Marshal Antonio Camacho Baza, was the very first U.S. Marshal, and he kept this title from late 1950 to early 1967. He passed away in 1967.
69.
69?
But
okay, because our
yeah,
records say he retired, and it's probably because of health reasons, maybe.
I think he retired because of health reasons, and if I make a comment at all, my father never belonged to any party. So whenever there's a new president, I asked my father when he saw me in Washington, D.C., how are you going to get another appointment? He said, well, it all depends on the president. And I said to my father, but you've got to belong to a party. He said, no, in Guam.
Yeah.
I put 2 cases of 2 dozen chickens to one party and 1 dozen chicken to another party that doesn't belong to me. So he told me that, you know. So.
But this is interesting for the record that he was appointed by 3 different presidents.
3 different.
Harry S. Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, and President John F. Kennedy.
And
so that's a historical part of the island, is to have a U.S. Marshal to be appointed by three different presidents. So can I ask you, this question is, when your father was first appointed, how old were you at that time?
What do you mean?
How old were you? How old were you at that time that your father was appointed? Were you in your teens?
Yes, 1950 was, I was just going to Father Duenas, 1950. And in fact, my father, at that time, my dad doesn't really talk very much about his job, my father. The only thing he always mentioned is that the federal people were very few, those days. The court system, their function is so narrow, I think, because they're not too sure yet what federal laws applicable to one, especially immigration. As I understand, even there was no FBI in Guam. Investigative was military intelligence.
Yeah.
I understood later on. I asked my father, who investigates other than the local? No, I think it's the naval intelligence. And which I'm going to make a comment. When my dad became chief of police and the U.S. Marshal's office was open, while my father was becoming a chief of police, they brought somebody from the States, and a man, and they made him police commissioner. So they created a police commissioner in the government of Guam, which means they put somebody over my father.
Right.
The guy name was, my father told me that this man, my father, the police department investigated,
Right.
He suspected he was an intelligence officer.
Okay.
Because there were many people in Guam that were still in doubt whether they had collaborated with the Japanese. And they don't want to bring them into some official jobs. My dad kind of implied that this guy, I think his name was, I kind of look up his name, or he recommended Frost, F-R-O-S-T. My dad suspected he was an intelligence officer from the Navy, and then became federal. So my father moved out of that, he told me later on that said one of the reasons maybe he wanted to get out of that, we don't know that another American put over him again. We just become bosom. So my father went around and he explained to me that not only did he get a higher salary, he had no boss in Guam. His only boss is McShane in the Justice Department in D.C. He reported only to him, and then made him feel very good, because politics in Guam was very, forming, and power groups are supporting each other. So my father felt that he doesn't have to answer to any local politician, only at the appointment time. But that's what I think part of the reason I think my dad also went to the federal services. I think it had something to do with salary. There were dual salary system all the time. A local guy always was skilled below a hired American from the mainland. And I think that bothered my dad, Not it bothered, I think it reached a more.
Okay.
So this is one motivating factor, you move. No kids, but I was that young, and I was not really interested in what my father was doing.
Did it have any effect on your life, as far as him
Well,
being the U.S. Marshal and you had to behave a certain way?
The only thing my father explained to me is that when he was in the police informant, like chief police, many people disliked him because his men give them traffic tickets or arrest them on a Saturday night somewhere in a fiesta. So my father began to take me on weekends, and we used to practice 45 caliber. I used to shoot at age 14.
Yeah.
He uses his U.S. Marshal's gun, But the other thing my dad, too, because of he told me that, you know, a lot of people didn't like him. You know, in the old days, Chamorros don't like policemen. He made me go to a prison. Remember I told you the prison warden was
his buddy.
father?
Yeah.
To Raimundo Camacho, my godfather too. They had prisoners there who were expert in judo, Japanese prisoners, I think, during the war. You know.
Yeah.
And I went there to learn jiu-jitsu and judo for self-defense. So
From the prisons.
so whenever now, and also I went into boxing. So now whenever they know now that, you know, my father advised me, do that because then nobody will challenge you and they know you can defend yourself. And actually it worked.
So it protects,
He had
his
some-
position had an effect that he said you should be able to defend yourself when he's not around.
And also think
how very keen on
my
it.
dad was worried at one point because of the fact that part of the job is transporting prisoners.
Right.
And I think my father was aware of that. I think when he sent me to do jiu-jitsu, he was showing him how to hurt people. So maybe he learned from me, you know. But that probably was one thing with my father. The other one about my father is that I think my father was worried in his job. I don't know if you want to go to this subject matter about the transporting of prisoners.
Please go ahead.
You know, there was no, in Guam, it was only like a farm prison. You know, they make the prisoners farm and fish at night.
Yeah.
It's really, you know, self-sustaining.
Right.
They don't watch television or learn
Right.
computer. They go and work, you know, the prisoner. My dad was worried because there were some of these repeaters, recidivists, you know, and these are kids like 15 years old who lost their parents in the war, or they're poor, and they, you know, they don't have any, and they were kind of roaming around. They steal tires and they're repeaters. And I don't know why Shriver would insist at some point to send them to prison in McNeil Island in Seattle. My father, I don't think my dad didn't like that because he took one of them.
Right.
He thought that they're not hurting criminals, they're just kids that needed some kind of more parental supervision. And I don't know what happened to that kid that was sent to McNeil. He was not a hardened criminal. I mean, I don't know, he stole prankster.
So in his position as a marshal, he would have to transport the prisoners themselves.
Yeah, they were.
Who were his staff? Did he have a big staff, or
Usually my dad would use the deputy to do that. One Camacho is 6 foot 240 pounds. He can lift these prisoners up, but my dad, I think at the beginning was doing it just to know what's going on when you present the prisoner. What happens to that guy?
Yeah.
My father, so he would do this to find out.
So he had Mr. Deputy Juan Camacho?
Yeah.
And then did he have any other deputies, or it was just the two of them?
He would deputize my father people like a bailiff. There was a bailiff in court, Sigüenza, Don Jesus. He was a bailiff, and sometime when Camacho, my father's off island, and we saw in Wanganga, we called John Camacho. He's a big guy, and he loves his deputies, you know. But my father would deputize the bailiff on something like a summons or some complaint against a military personnel, like an accident, and he went hiding in the base, you know.
Yeah.
And my father would deputize either bailiff, and I am not too sure. I was once to deputize.
You?
Yeah.
You? Oh.
Another, my father was off island. I was here vacationing in 1958. By the way, I was a law student at that time. And, you know, Tun Sigüenza, you know, Tun Jesus, you know, we got to get this guy. He hit somebody in the morning and he fled to the base, and nobody can arrest him except a court order from the federal.
Right.
So he said, he's got this subpoena, you know, and I said to, you know, it's funny, he picked me up, and I thought he was joking. I said, you know what, I'll drive you up there, because it was my father's car.
Right.
Here's Marshal had a special car.
So he did have a car given to him by the
No,
Marshal?
it's only my personal, but he had a special, he can enter any military area.
Oh, he had pass.
Pass, and also like a special federal official enforcement.
Okay.
So you go to the Provost Marshal in Anderson. So I remember I am not too sure the recollection was a long time ago, but I went with him with the idea, which for me was nothing to do that day. So he said, I deputize you, and he gave me a badge. You know, so I
That's
put the
interesting.
badge, and the two was there, you know. Now, Tony Sus actually was a guy who was a retired from the old Navy in Guam, not regular Navy, but a Navy.
Okay.
And he knew very much the Navy, the military system, even the military system of justice. And he said to me, we're going to go get that guy, because you know what they're trying to do? They're trying to put him on an airplane to fly to Clark and reassign him over there. He hit somebody, damaged a car. Nobody was hurt, but it was a bad damage. And the military nowadays are not too cooperative when somebody, I think it's happening in Okinawa, you know, that's one of the problems.
Okay.
The agreement is when somebody,
So it was against
So-
the local person or property that damages
yeah,
were
was
made?
damaged by a military
Oh,
enlistment,
okay.
airman. And I think my father's office called it for his Marshal, you know, about him to try and avoid this court order and
Right,
arrest.
and they wouldn't release
And they
him.
were kind of not too cooperative.
Okay.
And this is when I think Shriver gave that subpoena. But I was with him to Anderson in 1958, and the gate, the guy at the military guy, we show him our badge, only to the provost marshal's office, you know. And we went there, and if I recall correctly, Tun Sus was smarter than most of people, you know, that I know. He said, you go to the front door. Just make sure you got your badge, or show him. And go to the back door, because I'm sure they're hiding him back there, you know. But anyway, I went to the front door and I told the provost marshal office that I'm from the U.S. Marshal's office. And you know, we
You
want
gonna
this.
pick him up?
We want to pick this guy up, or we want to present him. Actually, subpoena. The marshal, the military police can bring him if they want
Yeah.
to. So Sus went to the back door, and he called him.
Trying to escape.
Trying to escape, I think, because he was, you know, I think they were trying to move him out of the island.
Oh.
And so I don't know, this guy, I don't know, is an officer of some kind, and he said, wait, and the first thing you know, the Sus came in the front door with this guy. He called him back there.
And so what did you
And
do?
this
You
is the
take him?
military, I don't know, no, we just, I think what we did was that he got now the subpoena.
Okay. So he
And
was serviced.
now it's up to this officer in charge of policeman to deliver him, or else we're gonna handcuff him.
Yes. Yeah.
So we didn't want to handcuff him, we don't know. But anyway.
So
that
how
was-
often did you do this type
Only
of work?
only this once, and my father was on the island when I was doing this. But I thought it was very funny that I told him, I said, boy, this is funny to go into military base and try to arrest a military guy, you know. But that, in a sense, is. And by the way, that's the same year I told you when I could not enter Guam.
Right. You mentioned something about
with the
that.
security clearance. That's the same year, you know, I couldn't get.
What, for the benefit of the people that didn't hear the story,
Yeah.
can you repeat it? How you were off to college and you needed to come back home? And,
Well, you know, I
at
went.
that time-
Yeah, you know, I was in, you know, Washington D.C. I was going to Catholic University, and I went down to. My father sent me. You know, in those days it's cheaper. Your parents buy your ticket in Guam, then they mail it. It's cheaper because no tax in Guam, nothing.
right.
So he sent me this plane ticket from Pan American plane ticket by registered mail, and I got it. But I had to go down to the Pan American office to set a time when to leave, you know.
Right.
And they told me, in very firm language, you've got to get a naval security clearance. You know, as a 20-year-old guy, well, when I'm going to go down to the Navy Department and ask to enter my own naval clearance to go back to. But I told the lady, I said, what if I don't have it? She said, well, you might be sent back. You won't enter Guam, and then you have to pay your ticket
To come back to
to
the
come
States.
back to the States. You will not enter Guam. You know, that bothered me You know, it bothered me. Why do we have to do that? I understand the security problem with communist containment and all, not that I understood that well, but I reacted badly, I think. And I figured, you know, the only person can arrest me would be U.S. Marshal's office. Not even the immigration office, they don't have authority. Because the base is military, but one corner for civilian use.
Right. Uh-huh.
But I landed, you know, at 2 in the morning, and I didn't have the security clearance, and the lady, you know, what do you call that, the airport when I entered, you know, who looked at my ticket and said, you know, it's up to you. When I was boarding, you know, the plane. So when I came there, there were, you know, the door goes to a naval clearance, naval security, and they refused to let me into Guam. I gave them my passport. My passport said I was born in Guam, right there.
You had to have a passport to come
Yeah.
to Guam, or to travel.
Yeah, and then underneath it I put down the name of the person who's responsible to me. I put my father, and I put my address, I put where I was born. Now tell me why I couldn't enter the island. I have no other place.
So did your father come and pick you
Well,
up?
and my father was sitting outside, and I told this officer, I said, you know, officer, I don't have any home in this world. This is the only home I have.
Yeah.
It just happened that I'm entering in a military base. If you have another air base, why don't you send me to another air base and I'll enter? And he didn't like it. He thought that there's a security problem, and I, you know, exaggerate those things in those days because they're still bitter that they ruled Guam for 50 years and we got rid of them. They're bitter. They never people. They were very bitter. And I think this is part of the intimidation. We cannot enter beaches, we cannot enter military bases, watch basketball games on. It's always, why are you coming in? Why? We own the island. This is our home. You know. So
when your father...
my dad was sitting out there listening, and it's a good thing. And then the Navy changed the argument. What about vaccination? Do you need a vaccination to go from the United States to your own home? Maybe if I'm coming from, you know, Philippines. I mean, is it returning to your home? What do you want with vaccination? Anyway, the immigration was a smaller guy, and he was listening and he was laughing out there. He knew that I was going through these interrogations, and so my father was getting restless over there, and I said to this, I told this officer, I said, you know, officer, you have no authority. I'm not in the military. You have no authority. You cannot arrest me, and if you arrest me, I'm going to sue you for false arrest.
Yeah.
And if you keep me here any longer, you know, it's false arrest already. So either you turn me over to the immigration people, or there's a man out there who could arrest me. He's the only one. I didn't tell him who he was. And of course the immigration guy was laughing there because he came forward, you know. So the officer I don't know, phone calls, I don't know what he did. But I started walking away, you know.
Yeah.
And then at that point, I think is when my father entered the picture. That's when the officer and my father flashed
His badge.
He told him that I'm the U.S. Marshal. I'm the only one that can arrest him. You couldn't.
Yeah. And what did the military
He's like, you know, he's aware, but make sure, you know, that I think he told the immigration officer, make sure that he gets security clearance and he gets his vaccination shot. We left, you know. I didn't get vaccination shot.
And your dad never
And
arrested
never
you? You never got
clearance.
arrested. Okay, we want to clarify that for the record.
But I was not arrested by my father. Then maybe arrested me by taking me home, but actually there was nothing, I think, in the code, in the Guam law, that I don't think there's anything in the code that say you can arrest me for entering your home. It's a naval regulation. Applies to foreigners primarily, I think, or people that are not from Guam. But you know, military people follow military code.
Protocol,
You know.
yeah.
I mean, I think the fellow was doing his job. Okay, so now you hear the story. That it's difficult, I think, in those days, the police enforcement. They're not too sure exactly, really, the authorities. And my dad was then both as a local policeman, marshal, chief police, and then as a federal official. Wasn't they too sure?
As a U.S. Marshal, and you mentioned that he would go off island once a year.
Yeah.
Was it for training or was it for a conference or what
think,
type of business did he
I
do?
asked my father a number of times, and I think it's something to do with either. I think it's mostly like they give him a briefing, because my father, you have to remember this. I don't know how my dad can run an office as a disbursing officer with a federal judge, court clerk, about 10 people. He's trying to figure out how to a payroll system for them, and that's not my father's job as a police chief.
I'm sorry, your
my
father
father
was
a disbursing officer.
and he created your paycheck?
He is the one that actually gave the checks to the
Did
federal judge, the
he
prosecutor.
figured it out and he...
No, he's handling all the checks coming from the mainland to make sure that
it was
these guys
dispersed.
are
Okay, so it was
disbursing
already...
officer.
Okay.
And my dad had a little problem because I said my father, he studied some kind of business, but he didn't know the military disbursing. So my dad had a friend named John Guerrero, Chamorro guy, who was in the Navy, and he was an expert in the Navy, payroll system,
Yes.
and he helped my father figure out how these guys, handle it. So actually, not only was he short, in staff, we got one secretary who handles portions of that.
Right.
But you've got a district attorney and his staff. You got the shriver and his staff, and my father is handling as disbursing officer for all these people. He has to have a time card for them. I mean, he's running a. My God, when I look at your organization now, boy, you are very specialized.
Yes,
My God,
we've grown by bouncing league. But
Yeah.
I still want to clarify. Your father was a dispersing officer, and he would retain these time cards or have an area.
His secretary, I think,
Okay.
but the point is, why was my father responsible
for
for the salaries and keeping of records of other federal officials in the federal court?
Yeah.
And Gordon Homie, the prosecutor, got a staff of 4, and my dad was going bananas because he doesn't have enough people. And
Who was his secretary?
it's a lady by the name of she is a WHITE White. I think they might have picked up that name long time ago. Maybe somebody in the family married somebody by that name. But in Chamorro we call him White.
Quite.
We didn't say white. But that lady apparently was very good. But she herself was scratching her head because
Too much.
my father would get some notices from DC about some changes in the payroll system. And here you are, actually a police enforcement guy. You got to worry about my father, somebody in a bankruptcy. My father had to go to a store and they have to inventory. They got to have and on top of that, I got to figure out how to pay these people their salary. So they were really in what a situation they were in with a lack of staff. And
Did he ever ask for additional staff? Do
you know,
recall?
my father was a funny guy. For whatever reason it is, whenever he went to Washington, he was so careful about spending money because he's the bookkeeper. In other words, if he made a mistake of himself, therefore they figure he made a mistake on all the others. My father will go and he has a kind of an allowance of plane ticket and hotel. And every time he came to Washington, he calls me up. And I said, why are you staying in a cheap hotel? My father, because it's only 1 block from the Justice Department, but it was a regular tourist cheap hostel. I said, why don't you move down to fancy little hotel because you got about 2 days flying or something,
Right.
My father said, no, I have to be very careful about spending because, he's the man that makes sure that no money is spent beyond what it is supposed to be spent. And I always thought that maybe that was my father was well liked by the people in Washington because they asked him where he's staying, and I guess they made faces, you know. But that I always thought was unnecessary for him because of the
He
trip
was a
involved.
prudent traveler.
Yeah, I think he's very careful about spending federal money.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we do have our travel regulations, and so
Yeah.
it allows us to sleep at nicer places.
Yeah, no.
Even though it may not be necessary, it still
Yeah.
allows us. So that's interesting to know, because as we are faced with a budget crisis and
Yeah.
furloughs and everything, and although your father had the authority to spend
Yeah.
money, he was still very conscientious about spending
Yeah.
it, and
Yeah, I know.
maybe he just didn't want to his first audit. Did he ever get audited?
Well, no, I asked him when he ever got audited. He said in those days there were no auditors, there were no probation officers. I don't even think there is. You have a special group. You have a security.
We have a court security office.
Yeah, I don't think he has any of those things.
It was just him, Mr. Blas, did you say?
I think
The deputy?
Camacho, yeah.
Camacho, and then
Camacho.
Juan Camacho, and then his secretary. That was his whole staff.
That's his whole.
And then he managed the district court, and
District court and the prosecutor or district attorney's office for their payroll and all of that.
Wow.
So I got to know Gordon Homme very well, and whenever he comes to Washington, he will call me up.
Yeah.
Me and my father, he called my son. So Gordon and I would talk, and I asked him about Guam. He never says anything. But I think Gordon was in the process of moving to D.C. He wants to
Okay.
quit his job, and I think was being offered a position in the Senate. And that's how I got to know him a little bit. But Gordon never said anything whether my father could use more staff because he's handling disbursing also.
Right,
You know.
right.
He never mentioned that. I asked my father to ask these other people because you're doing this job for them also. You know,
Right.
but they were not in those days.
You did the job, and you
Yeah,
tried to make do with what
you have to
had.
remember though, Lane, that Guam then was in the 50s probably like 30,000 Samoans. Military in and out, the Korean War was over, they were here. In 1944, 200,000 of them were here for the invasion of Japan. Then they all went home after the atomic bomb. So they were reduced down to 36,000 by the time we were surviving, So when I was here in the 50s, the villages here at night were really known to very few people. Many young men were joined the military, they left or something. So Guam was very small, and maybe that's why their budget was never, they never gave them more. They figure that they don't have a large population because you have no CNMI, isn't it, with you?
No, not at that time.
No, now,
NMI came much later in the 70s,
yeah.
78.
So you now expand your
Right.
your jurisdiction.
Well, not
Yeah.
so much in that sense, because it's still a district.
Yeah.
It's a separate district from Guam,
Yeah.
but because that's probably how your father operated,
Yeah.
in like a Saipan office, very
Yeah.
small.
Yeah.
Was there only one judge at that time that he
Yeah.
had to protect?
Yeah.
Was there, did he ever felt that he was in, his life was in danger? Or
I don't know,
your lives, his
I asked
children's
my
lives?
father, do you carry a gun? You mean he
Yeah.
can. Well, he said, when he's with a prisoner,
Yeah,
he carries.
but not daily.
No,
Not like when.
my father, I think my dad was very well known because he was a chief police,
Yeah.
many policemen, So he, and I understand the U.S. Marshal can actually request the aid of the local police if he wants to. At that time, he can ask them. He can call up and ask for some hardened criminal or after. But I don't think my father, although he practiced a lot, he goes to the firing range and they put all these bottle of beer cans and we shoot them on Saturday. I still have 5 bullets from him. I don't know how I got it to DC to watch them but when he died, I have some personal stuff, and I don't know, just for the heck of it, I took 5 bullets and put in my briefcase, and nobody stopped me.
Now, if you do that, you can get arrested.
I got arrested with that bullet. I was trying to give
Oh, my
it to
heavens.
Caesar.
Yeah.
He said he was going to be one, but I'll give him my father's bullet. He's been
Yes,
there
I
now.
think there was a time when he was going, but I think the connection was in the...
Yeah.
But on the side note, also part of this Judicial Arts and History Society, we also are collecting memorabilia from from anyone. And if you have something like that from your father, you want to donate.
I don't know who got his pistol. I never knew. It must have been my brother-in-law. I think Carlos Camacho. He might have, because I asked once, what happened to my father's gun?
Yeah. Oh, that would be wonderful if you find out.
Because he never shot anybody, but at least we shot some beer cans,
No, that's good. That's that says a lot. You go your whole career without shooting your gun at another person.
And I don't even know what happened to his badge, my father. I think when he died, my father was living in the States, and most of his personnel went to my sister, and there was a big typhoon, and my sister hid it someplace.
And it probably blew away.
But it'd be interesting if I, the thing really I think about my dad, if I think my father, I think if I were to say something, I thought that he kind of he got a fairly good impression of the federal people, dealing with them. I don't know why McShane, then the chief U.S. Marshal for the Justice Department, I don't know why he befriended my father very well, because even I gave you some, even Kennedy signed a note on my father's retirement. He picked some line and poetic line, and then he signed it. Robert Kennedy. I think I gave a copy.
No, you did. You gave me. I have it in my office.
I always try to figure out what was the connection, because as I said, my father would go there, and the most things he would talk about is like he befriended the U.S. Marshal from Honolulu. And it was very nice, because on the way back he would vacation there for 3 days with the Marshal. And my father, I think, befriended a lot of other marshals just to find out their problems. I think my father was trying to inquire how they deal, because I said, I think my dad, in his time, they were not too sure really about a status. We know we have a court, but we know also that the U.S. Constitution does not fully extend all the protection to the territories, especially, the, so to speak, the unincorporated. Like the 10th Amendment, reserve power. Our government here, Congress can do anything they want to do. We cannot do anything about it. They can take our citizenship tomorrow, because under the law we're only a congressional U.S. citizen. We're not naturalized. This came to me once when I was in a position at the department. I was in a policy level. I was going to attend a kind of a meeting that was very needed top security, and I was questioned about my citizenship. There are lawyers there looking at it.
Right.
Are you really a citizen? Because you're a congressional citizen. I mean, it's kind of some special provision of the naturalization law. And I said, well, as far as I know, I'm a U.S. citizen. But whether Congress would change it, I don't think they would change it, but they could change it for others in Guam.
So what you're referring to as congressional citizens are those that prior to the Organic Act, those born before the 1950 August, were congressional appointment citizens versus
U.S.
citizen born.
And this is why I always thought that you know, when Chamorros are talking, you know, about political status, since some of these definitions work against you, why not use it for your favor?
Yeah.
Because in effect, really, the fact that you're redefined, that means really that you are not in, that you have been deprived of certain of your. This is what I sometimes discuss with my dad as a police enforcement person. You know, I had my father say, how comfortable are you enforcing a lot of laws? And some of these laws do not protect our people. You know, eminent domain and all this stuff. You know, my father, and I think my father was one of those people that he takes a job and he makes the best of it, and he always thinks that maybe time it will improve, you know, and I think most of us Chamorros think that way. But see, the younger people now are much more educated, they're much more well-traveled, and I think they are looking at things where I think not just a gradual change, but I think is to confront this and make it clear really. I can't see for the life of me why Chamorros cannot vote for the President of the United States when you send somebody to get killed in Afghanistan right now. You know, I mean, why not? They vote.
I know.
But I
Our
think
status
it's a
treasure.
constitutional issue that most people don't think is that important, you know. But I still think that it's symbolic. Now I'm getting off my father, but I did.
No, but well, how did your
I
father
did discuss
feel?
this, but my dad, you know, is that one person that you have to remember. He's a product of the first decade. Tremendous changes going on. I don't know how they dealt with it. I don't know. You don't know half the time who you are. Bradley in the 30s made Guam for the first time that you Chamorros are citizens of Guam. We were never citizens of anything before that. I mean, this is my father's time. They don't even know whether they're citizens
What to
of
call
anything.
themselves.
Yeah, and this is where, you know, it bothered me later on because my dad made a career of police enforcement, and I always kid my father that, you know, when you're colonized, you're like a parrot. The parrot memorizes and keeps repeating, and suddenly he thinks he knows it, but he's only repeating what he was told, you know. But I think that was my dad's challenge, and people of his generation, a lot of other Chamorros in other fields, you know, I think they faced that same thing, you know.
When your father was the Marshal, did he ever felt that he had to turn the other way, particularly when there was a conflict between, you know, if a person committing a crime, whether it was a territory at the time, so his crime go to the courts, versus it's a federal crime, it'll come to the federal courts.
Yeah.
So did you ever feel your father had to turn the other way, particularly? I mean,
Yeah,
because I think there's a lot of tremendous pressure, I believe, on your father at the time would be the
yeah, I
Marshal
don't know.
or-
Yeah, I think those are kind of a little bit, you know, the intricacy of the American civil procedure and justice. But my father and I sometimes talk a little bit like this. You know, there is such a moral, and I'm not making a speech, but I think Chamorros have an aspect of how they look at laws. We Chamorros, I think, are very grounded in our religious belief. Nobody has to write a law. We know what right or wrong from our religious belief, but you know, I think Chamorros, for the most part, like that. They're very obedient, matriarchal society, obedient to their parents. That's where my father, I think, began that problem. He had that problem when he was chief police, and I don't know whether he saw it as a U.S. Marshal, but I don't think, because there were no probation officer in his time in the district court.
So you got sentenced and then you served your
Yeah.
time?
Yeah, I
And
think
then that was it?
my dad, I think, had problem when it comes to juvenile. When he was in chief police, and I think that might have carried enforcement in the U.S. Marshal. Guam in those days had a court, that police court. There's another court that handles family affairs, and another court, and most of the judges, like Judge Manibusan,
Yeah.
you know,
The father?
the grandfather of this Judge Manibusan
Oh,
now,
okay.
Hussein Manibusan. He, I think, handled a lot of the civil thing, like family affairs, juvenile thing. My dad, when a young kid, did something, break somebody's car or smash, my father, I think, in his police capacity, they don't try to put a record on him. But what they do is this: they call Judge Manibusan, and then they call the parents, and then the parents and Judge Manibusan get together, and they try to resolve this so that the kid will know. But most of the time, my father, they will come to our house,
Yeah.
the parents first,
Yeah.
and then my dad said, "Well, now we've got to sit down with Judge Manibusan, and let's hear the judge because he's the person who has to, weigh these things." But my dad would not put a legal arrest on a kid or anything like that. But I always understand my father's position was this: when it is a juvenile, we get the judge, we get the parents, and we get the parish priest.
The priest.
Parish priest. So
Interesting.
they
Wow.
brought the parish priest, they brought the family, the parents, and they brought Judge Manibusan, and that's it. That is the tomorrow approach in those days to juvenile problem. Now, I don't know what they do now. They take them psychiatrists and all this stuff, but I thought that
That
was
is interesting.
interesting that they were
parish
doing it
priest,
that
yeah.
way.
And this is not just for the local crimes, but it pertains to the
Juvenile, yeah. My dad
instead of
thought,
trying
yeah.
to get rid of them, just
Yeah, they
your dad,
yeah,
your
they-
dad tried to probably
Yeah.
install some like rehabilitation and says,
Yeah.
okay, this is your second chance. So that's great.
Yeah, it's
That's
very interesting,
wonderful.
and this is why I always thought that in Chamorro tradition there's a lot of unrevealed contribution that American system of justice and other people's justice is not available. I mean, we don't look at that in such a frame of rigid rules. We look at it as a social, parental problem, and I think this is the contribution of not my father, but I think the system of my father and the Chamorros involved in police enforcement at that time. And little by little this dissipate.
It's no longer
It's
available.
done big
The
town.
parish priest only comes in when it's
Yeah.
they're no longer around.
Yeah,
That's
and,
unfortunate.
you have public defenders now before they don't. So many different things now. It's difficult to.
What do you think your father, if we were to ask him this question, what was his greatest contribution as a U.S. Marshal? What would he have said?
Kind of hard really because it's been a long time ago, and my dad, whenever you discuss something, my father's one of those persons that I think some things he just would not talk very much, but I always thought that in the matter of police enforcement and the U.S. Marshal, I always thought that he appears to me like he had a way to connect a small island, unknown, talked badly by military people stationed here because they saw nothing here but war damage. They call this the rock. They make a joke of us, But the military do not want to be stationed in Guam. They want to be stationed in Japan, Korea.
Right.
So my dad, I think, for some reason, had a linkage with McShane, for instance, and federal officials to understand that there is a community out there of people.
Yeah.
We're not, most people think we're Samoans. We're not Samoan. We're not Micronesian. We're not from, Palau or something. We're Chamorros. You've been here with a very high standard of social structure going back to the 17th century. Then, when the Americans came in 1900, I don't know what they saw, but it was a fairly knowledgeable group of Chamorros in the island and self-sufficient. At least they're, I'm saying now a little bit off, but when people ask me in the United States about Guam, I always told them that at least in my time and my contemporaries, nobody was ever poor in Guam. Because that's what they're asking. What kind of salaries do you have there? Everybody has a piece of land. Most people have farm, they fish, they provide their family, and if they get a job, fine. But the point is, there's no hunger, and I don't see poverty other than maybe lack of something you have to buy, but not food. Not. This is what I always thought. Maybe this is what my dad, in his job, when he goes to these people, they think we're all kind of people way off some little island.
Wearing grass skirts and wearing grass skirts.
Yeah, that's that.
Yes.
And
believe it or not, still in the 1980s, I still get that.
And I think most Americans are I don't think it's ignorance. I think it's such a huge country. I mean, most people I met when I was a student there in the 50s never saw an ocean. And here I'm coming, and the only thing about an island they remember is Gillis Island, where you can walk from one beach to the other beach and the ocean.
One side of the other
so
side.
that's what they think of. We're so small. How can you live there? And I just. But I think really that my father probably and other people in their contact, I think, with federal officials, the fact that they don't look like from the United States, I think this is why I always thought that we should push Chamorros at the position to deal with Washington so they can see you. See who you are, what you look like. Because I don't know what Madeline Blonde from Minnesota are doing over there. It doesn't help our image because they think that, oh my God, it's Hawaii right now, they have to put somebody from the mainland to run their island. But I'm not saying of the government, but I would like to see some moral presence in the nation's capital, delegates, people that testify, some moral officials from the judiciary system.
Right.
It's very good because it enhances our image to get something.
I think your dad did that, at least in my opinion, to be the first U.S. Marshal and to keep being the Marshal for 17 years. And from what I can tell from the archives that I gathered, that's commendable for him because for the most part, like you say, the turnover between the presidents is
so
just
many
right.
turnover, and hardly really anybody knows about the island.
Yeah. And then for him to sustain a equilibrium between the local and the federal, I think that it takes a man of common sense as well as leadership to make the Marshal service.
As I said, when you asked me that question, my first reaction is, how did that Major McKinley like my father when he was in the police force under the Navy in 1944? He liked him. He got killed later on in Korea. I mean, I asked my father, how did you, because my father most of the time never liked receptions because they always feed you, he said, carrots and
This is in his conference?
Yeah, so, I mean, but he appears to have a way with, I think, with people who do not know us and they come here. He appears to have like some kind of linkage, maybe because my dad probably, I asked one friend of my father, something that you asked me, about my father, and that was the Jose Leon Guerrero, who they named the port after him. Port Authority, Younger. That's my father's good friend, I asked him once, he told me that he and my father were good friends from childhood. I asked him about my father, he said, your father, he writes well. So maybe that's it. He writes well. He said, my father, very good writer. He said, no, maybe that's why the Marines like him, because, a lot of Marines, only high schoolers too.
Did he ever keep memoirs on
my
his
father
journals?
He had a diary during the war and got burned in the bombing, but he rewrote one, and I keep it in, I keep one that he wrote it after the war by memory.
Yeah, but did he ever mention anything of the Marshal service in the?
I'm going to look at it because I still have it, but the only thing is he made some statement against me. That's why I don't know.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
If you can give us, if you can go over it and look at
Yeah.
what he's written down, and if you can,
Yeah.
either make copies of it or, like I said, the society is seeking donations. Oh, that would be wonderful.
But as I said, really, I think really, that this, your system, your judiciary, is not just that my father, was part of this institution, but I think this is for the first time, we were protected under the law, and we had a court system.
I believe
and my dad was part of it, I think that was
after
the
your
biggest thing.
your father passed away in the
69, yeah.
69.
Yeah,
That was the time of the change between the equal rights and the.
Oh, there were a lot of civil rights riots in the United States. 68.
How about here in Guam? Did they have a lot of civil rights?
I think in Guam the movement here was young people questioning really political status, and then there was this awareness of the indigenous people, and some of them. I mean, Dr. Underwood, University of Guam, they formed a group and they appeared in the United Nations to bring out the idea that Guam is not self-governing, and they're correct. And the point here really is that I live in the United States and I face a lot of my friends, and they ask me for the island. And sometimes I don't know how to be tactful too, because after a while you lost diplomacy when you. I keep telling my friends, you guys, I know that I live here with you. We're too busy paying taxes and worrying about something else. Why would anybody care about islands, Puerto Rico, Guam? Why will anybody, or Micronesians? And here's the thing: Americans in general are very utilitarian. They're very practical. If you have something against you, strike. Form collective movements. I mean, that's the way they tell you. And I always thought that there were movements here on the island at one time. They went to the United Nations. There was a committee here for decolonization. There's one in the paper the other day. We're still a colony. Not a bad colony, but what I call a colony really that, this is only my judgment, part of the problem in here really is, I don't think that the Congress of the United States will permit us to develop in a sense where it might be like against the military interests in the island. Because you can't develop an economy, 1/3 of the island on the military, 1/3 on the government of own property, and I think that this is probably the big problem is how do you develop this island on a non-self, we like a governor, but if you look at the organic, I guess fully unreliable. It's a federal piece of document. I didn't vote for it, you didn't vote for it, nobody voted for it, so it doesn't represent our interests. And the eminent domain clause that, the eminent domain clause is very bad on us. Because as I said, we need to build an economy. And how do you build an economy? We need, I think, to be able to go and sit with the State Department where they're like a lot of negotiations that affect, tribal business to Guam. Why do we have to import something from China to go to the United States and then ship by Matsu? Why not from China to here? Why not Matsu monopolize trade routes? I mean, this is where we are, and I feel that American people don't know this. The average American, my neighbors don't know this. If they know this, they say, well, what's the matter with you guys? Do something, But I think that there were clashes, I think, in the past here in Guam, but I think most of the people here on the island, as I said, you can't say too much about federal issues because of the fact most of the young men, either they can afford to go to college or they end up in the military. There are not too many options,
Yeah. Especially for
So
the men.
if you have a military that has a strategic interest in Guam, we got a Chamorro guys, an admiral, we got several generals. So this is where, even among ourselves, we see that how Guam is to be used, how it's to be developed is a tough problem. But I always thought the United States should make us a commonwealth. We become the symbol of how America has democracy, and we can still protect American interests. Doesn't have to be under an organic act.
Did your father feel this way? Did he
Huh?
feel? Did your father?
I told him, my father said, you know, you carry a colonial policy. And then my father said, what do you mean colonial policy? I said, yeah. Well, I didn't. I said, did you vote for the organic act? I said, no, but we send men over there with petitions signed in favor of it. And that's not voting, that's a petition. But I think my father was very non-political on those issues. I think, you know, you have to remember there, the transition, the first decade, small population, there's a fear that we could probably survive, you know, on our own.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it.
But during that time, yes.
Yeah, I think so. That but I tell you the truth, the real issue really the young people today. You know, I'm a person who feel that I live in the United States for so many years in D.C., nation's capital. I saw that city change from a small southern town into a big cosmopolitan city that New York right now used to call D.C. They used to call the Washingtonian hick town. Can you imagine hick town in the nation capital? I mean, I'm
No.
living over there.
I've been there many times.
Yeah.
But you know, it amazes me your opinion, and I'm sure your father is respecting of that too. But was there anything else that your father may have mentioned to you that would be significant?
My dad,
did he like his job? Did he like being the U.S. Marshal?
I think my father's my father's happiest job was becoming chief police. He got
Okay.
200 men under him, he told him. He can push the button, you know. He got only 3 people, U.S. Marshal. But I think my father, with the U.S. Marshal, I think it allowed him to do that. Traveling, he began to understand who are our rulers by going to Washington. He knew who was in charge, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that might have been the thing my father, maybe this is how he passed to other people that, look, we're dealing with officials in Washington, that if we make our grievance real, and you know, we get something done. But you know, young people like me at that time, we don't have that kind of framework to wait another 100 years, you know. But I think that it's very difficult to say, you know, because you know I'm biased because he's my father, and but I always thought that my father was very dedicated in his job. My father looks at always the positive side of the job. He's not the type that looks for the negative side. You know, I don't know why he didn't ask for more funds, because he really needed it, but at that time. But I think though that in police enforcement, I think my dad, at least up to the Kennedy era, I think they knew that in Guam, people here are very law abiding. I think my father, because you know, when he sends those reports about arrests, I mean, minor offenses, you know, minor.
Did he ever come home and say he didn't like his job because of what he did?
Well, I tell you the truth, my father always said that he likes becoming the chief police, but I think he likes the U.S. Marshal because he had no post in Guam. That thing,
No
you know,
post?
there's nobody over him, in charge of him.
Yes.
Uh,
If you're the U.S. Marshal, that is so true.
yeah, you know, and I think that you have to remember our political parties were just developing.
Yeah.
And my dad, you know, knew that politicians have a way. For instance, when we give too many, my father remembers telling me that when he gives a lot of
Donations?
traffic violations.
Oh.
Some of those like
Oh,
accident reports.
Yeah.
Every insurance company was a piece of that paper quickly, and we Guam police cannot sit around and compose for insurance policy guys. And there are some insurance people that were after my father, angry, politicians. I'm not gonna name who they are, because but I think some of those were like pressures in the island on your job, and the U.S. Marshal was completely on his own in the island. I think they operated here. You still carry orders from the from Justice Department. You don't take orders from anybody here. No.
No.
The chain of command here.
Yes, the Marshal does have his boss, as we do. They're a director, but part of the Marshal Service, our agency, what we do is, if the court issues out an order to arrest, to serve, to whatever, then it's up to the U.S. Marshals agency to impose it, or to to serve it, like the summons. If it's a judicial warrant to go on an arrest, if it's a judicial, if it's a sentence, then take that person to that destination to serve their time.
Well, anyway, I thought I'd give you a number. As I said, my dad got very sick with lung cancer by 64, I think, my father. They found lung cancer, my dad. And that's when I visited him in California. I was hospitalized at the hospital there. And so, I started talking about, and he was trying to tell me that he might have to leave. But I think that from all the time I spent with, he never said anything
negative
about the U.S. Marshal's office. He always thought that they were doing the very best with very limited funds.
Yes. And we still do.
We still do, huh? Yeah.
And I think that's the unfortunate thing, is 200 and almost 23 years of being in the Marshal Service. We're still not considered. We're not as considered, especially when money is involved. But we're far cry. Your father had a secretary and a deputy and himself.
Deputy.
We have
three of them, and he could deputize.
Yes.
I told you I was deputized.
Our Marshal it's our Marshal, our chief. Then we have a supervisor. Then we have a judicial security inspector who takes care of the courts. Then we have what we call a sexual SOIC, SIOC, for those crimes committed through sexual acts. And then we have our deputies. We have 5 here in Guam. We have a vacancy, but there's 5 in Guam, and then 4 in Saipan.
That's right. You have an office in Saipan.
So we've really expanded.
You're a big organization now.
We have an admin officer. We have a budget analyst, and then a criminal civil
you
clerk.
got a lot of specialists on board.
But we don't have secretaries. Those are a thing of the past.
I think the secretary was also like a bookkeeper. But there were only 25,000 people, but still, there were many aliens in that time. Filipino
still
workers.
Coming through.
Camarojas, Camkid, 20,000 here, I don't know, many. And this is the era, I think, where my dad and the immigration. Oh, if you want to know one incident, my father, one fella, I'm not going to name names, but one Filipino married a very prominent local woman in there, in a big wedding. I even attended that wedding. It turned out he was a bigamist. He had a wife in the Philippines and a family, so when they discovered that, the immigration moved in, and my father had to take him, put him in a military plane to Clark as a U.S. Marshal. And my father, was telling me, this is the funniest story I ever told you about transporting prisoner. He went to Clark Airfield, which is a military base in the U.S., and he told my father he wanted to see Manila. wanted to go back and go look up a place he used to know when he was a young kid, going to school. This is about maybe 1951, maybe 52, like that.
Right.
Anyway, he left Clark. He got a ride from an American officer to Manila. He booked in a hotel. 7 o'clock that night, there was a guy running from the U.S. Embassy looking for him because he told them where he was going to be.
Right.
The Philippine government wanted to deport my father for illegal entry. It was a retaliation. The Filipinos got mad because we deported a Filipino with a due process or law, whatever it is. So my father, who was having dinner in Manila hotel, jumped to his room, took his suitcase, went in the embassy car. You cannot arrest anybody in the embassy car.
Right.
Went to the embassy, and then they transported him up to Clark and then back to Guam. My father.
That was his.
Yeah, he said it was the funniest experience he ever had in transferring a prisoner out of the island. But the lady, they married and had a family, had a family.
And he's a big.
Yeah, but he already had a family in the Philippines. My father told me that, and I said, "Gee, did you finish your dinner?" He said, "No, he had to rush because he might be put in prison by the Philippine authorities." Oh, they were so angry of protocol that he entered Philippines without permission from the Philippine immigration.
Right.
Because he was in a military car in downtown. But that was, that would never happen right now, you transporting somebody to a foreign country, but maybe you do.
They're called extraditions.
Oh, they do that?
Yeah, we still do that.
Yeah.
Normally what we do, extraditing somebody is, they get arrested in a foreign country that country has extradition. What is it? A memorandum of understanding for extraditions.
Yeah.
Mostly they go to the Philippines. So the Philippine authorities are always very good about.
Oh, so they're cooperative now.
Very cooperative, and so when that happens, we go and pick them up. We don't return. They're not returned from here to the Philippines.
Yeah.
It's the Philippines coming back.
Yes. Anyway, I thought you might be interested that my father had that experience. That
Yes.
that is funny.
But he was a U.S. Marshal and he transported.
He had his credential, and he was, he was riding.
Do you know when this occurred?
I think this was in 1951, 52.
Early in his career.
Yeah, very early. And I was in that wedding. I knew the person who got married.
Oh, no.
I was a little boy, I was 16, 17 years old, but I never forgot that because he came and told us about it. And they said, "Did you see the Manila you knew?" I said, "Oh, no, different Manila." But I thought that being a U.S. Marshal, I think that's some kind of an interesting adventure,
Yes,
other than the job, Yeah.
The Marshal Service has changed greatly.
Completely,
from the time from your father's era to now, and it's not so much that the potential for danger is not the same. It's now the source of danger is now all like computerized, technical. Back then. He didn't have an automatic. It was just a pistol, probably. If you're able to find that pistol, thank you. God bless you.
Well, I asked somebody, I don't know, with my brother-in-law Carlos, because it ended in their house in a typhoon. One of the big typhoons, 62, the typhoon Karen.
Karen.
But I have 4 bullets, but I can't carry them over here.
Well,
arrested.
I am not going to say, but if you ever bring those back to Guam, however way you get them, and you're not arrested, we will certainly, the committee will certainly accept those, even if it's even if it's just a temporary show.
But actually, really, since we're talking about the institution of the court and the federal enforcement, I think my father really, I think one of the greatest things probably he felt was for at last in Guam we have a justice system. Before
Yes.
that, we didn't. In Guam in the old days you cannot leave Guam until the naval governor approves it. And you have to say that you have a farm and you have land, money to leave the island. I mean, we were prisoners on the island up to 1950. It took a World War II to change, and then we had Japanese came here and put us in Maniangon, So really, when you look at my father, probably your grandparents' life, they really had a horrible time in their life.
Anytime I believe you experience war firsthand,
bad.
that is, even now, with what's going on, and we're all related to somebody who was killed. And we're not talking about an older man. We're talking about somebody that could be our child.
Yeah.
So, that is the unfortunate thing about being in war, is nobody really comes out the winner. Nobody really comes, too many deaths are involved.
I think really, I live in the United States most of my life. I live in D.C. longer than I left Guam. I was 18 years old. I live longer in D.C. In my block, I live longer. I live in my block 30 years on D.C., right uptown there. So all my neighbors, they still don't know where Guam is. And when they ask me where Guam is, it doesn't remember. It's not in Samoa. They all think we're South Pacific.
With the Fijis and the Fijians
I mean, they're not ignorant people. It's just that we're so unknown. I think our delegate office should do a little bit more PR, going to speak before Chamber of Commerce someplace in different cities, and address some of those people that his colleagues in the committee should go to those places.
So we don't tip over.
Huh? Yeah.
Remember that Georgia senator or congressman? Was it Georgia? He was saying that to relocate all the Marines to Guam, or all these military folks, the island of Guam is going to tip.
Gonna give in, Well, it was a rumor by military in the old days. That's one of the reasons I think was just an issue not to be stationed in Guam. They think that the island is in the peak of a mountain, very deep ocean, the deepest in the world. So if you have an earthquake,
Yes.
down.
Yes.
I don't think so. I think we're on solid ground,
Very. We've lasted this long.
Yeah.
But is there anything else? You pretty much
Well,
answered all
really,
the
I
questions.
try to think,
that I asked.
the thing I'm trying to relate to is really that my dad, I think, and other people in his generation at that point, I think they all experienced something. Now, what they contribute or what they do, I thought there was a more difficult time for them to kind of like the ground rules suddenly change. Before, you don't have any court system. People have no citizenship of any kind. Bradley, I mentioned already to you, the governor decided, Bradley, that these people in Guam should be citizens or something. So he said that we are Guam citizens in 1936. Although we've been here over here about 2,000 years, but it's...
your father's generation has, I just recall, the Americans, the Japanese, the Spanish, and
to some degree the Germans nearby.
Right. But have been in your father's lifetime. It's really amazing how resilient they have all been, and how they been able to adapt to the atmosphere.
I think this is probably why, on the one hand, they say that we were isolated, and I think isolation sometimes helps us because we preserve our lifestyle. I think it's a moral survival is this. I go to Agana on Sunday and Saturday to go to confession and go to Mass, and then on the rest of the week I'm in the farm. They ignored naval government. They ignored them. They go, they do their own thing. And I think this is probably the secret of a survivorship.
Is
The fact that we're small numbers, but our people, I think for the most part, were very self-sufficient. They farm
think,
well,
yes,
they
yes.
and they provide for the family. And I think that was in the old days. They only come to Guyana. They have a home in Guyana, but they have farm and they raise all the food they need.
I would hear stories of that from my
Yeah.
parents as well. But the fact is, they've to have a father to be called the first U.S. Marshal, to make
Yeah.
do with what that it says a lot of things about
Yeah.
the character of a man that he is,
Yeah.
and then also the fact that he, for 17
Yeah.
years, I bet if it wasn't for his health, he would probably
Well,
be appointed by
he-
somebody else. Nixon, maybe.
Right. But
Was
that's
it Ford,
I think every person, I think they have a motivation. I think my dad was motivated by the fact that he always told me this, we should all come back to Guam, he was telling me. Because he said, Chamorro really can handle this island. My father always said that.
So why don't you come back to Guam?
I come only for 5 months because if I leave Washington and change my address, my home state status will be up, and I will pay more property tax. And there's another, the property tax in the mainland is so bad, and so you have to keep it your primary resident. But anyway,
Do you mean
that's really what I
6 months?
kind of carve, and I thought that
Mr. Baza,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah,
I really enjoy your conversation, especially when it comes to your father and what he's done. I like your conversation, your stories on how you became a deputy marshal.
I didn't know that he could do it, and I always remember that Sigüenza from
Yeah.
Sus, he was a bailiff. He was bailiff in the court. He announces the judge entering and loud but
Now we don't have a bailiff.
don't you have a bailiff?
No, they're called the clerks. They're
court clerk, yeah.
court clerks. They actually
Yeah.
they act like a bailiff, but they're not really a bailiff. Yeah.
Some more, have a sense of humor, so they like him because he shouts very loud.
Your father?
No, Sigüenza,
Oh,
the
okay.
bailiff. Here it is, or here it is, His Excellency Judge Paul Shriver of Colorado is arriving, something like that, and but tomorrow go there just to laugh,
You mentioned that you were off to Georgetown or
I went to
or
Catholic U and
to become a lawyer.
I studied law actually, but to be honest with you,
continue in the field?
I was very interested in jurisprudence, but somewhere along the line, I kind of got a little bit interested more in another area of study because when you're in Washington there after a while, there are thousands of lawyers over there. So at that time, I think I thought I'd get out of law school and study economics to get a job, And so I went into economic studies for just to get a job, then go back to night school or something like that. But I always thought that I had a little problem with law study. I had a problem with constitutional law, I had a friend from Puerto Rico. He went on and is practicing in Puerto Rico, Hector. We took on those insular cases. We understood why we're treated differently.
Yeah.
And we make an argument that, this kind of system of government makes these people really like colonized people. In which
Isn't Puerto Rico a commonwealth?
we have become Commonwealth, so they have a little more leeway on their legislature. They make laws that I don't think they have too much problem in conflict with federal law. Puerto Rico, for whatever reason, I only talked to some of these people. Their attack on the mainland to survive, create a commonwealth, is to change the mainland tax law that would not apply to them. They did not want to, they just say this should not apply to us. And I think they were very happy for 40 years and to NAFTA. NAFTA is the American arrangement, Mexico, Canada,
Yeah.
took advantage of Puerto Rico in the tax law in NAFTA. So Puerto Rican now are yelling for statehood, because they want to change the law or something. But I thought that one of my discouragement in the study of law was the fact that I thought really that at the time I thought that, yeah, it's very good if you're born in the United States, you're fully protected, but why are people not in the continent and you occupy them and, why do you treat them differently? I mean, why do you treat them differently, And then the fact that, the American lawyers are good people, but they are predominantly oriented, I think, in where you make a lot of money in commercial law, When it comes to actual civil rights, it took riots to change them. It took riots and many sacrifices. And I always thought that in my time, I think the Kennedys administration did a lot, and all these people, Maybe that's why my father got friendly with McShane, because McShane recognized the efforts of that administration to correct civil rights,
So you were always going to school in Washington, D.C.?
I lived there. I was in Michigan in a small Catholic institution called Aquinas. After 2 years over there, and many went to school there. My predecessors were Governor Camacho went there. They all went to that college. That's why I followed them, Monsignor Suilo. I think many Chamorros went there. Luis Camacho, the dentist, and Eddie Camacho, and all went to this college. And
are you related to that family?
Yeah.
Because it says your father is a Camacho.
Yeah.
But you're his namesake, but you're not a Camacho. You're a Herrero.
Yeah,
Herrero?
my mother's a Herrero.
Herrero.
Yeah, my father, is actually, they're all cousins with Governor Camacho. We're all the same family.
Okay.
Camacho on my grandmother's side. Now the Baza, there are quite a few Bazas, but they're not. There are few that I thought are related to us because, the Baza, there are some Filipinos, but they're SA.
You're ZA.
We are ZA.
You're the Spanish.
Yeah.
Spanish
It's not
Baza.
that we try to, just that the Filipino Baza is Filipino.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I went to Spain and I looked at the town of Baza to make sure there is a Baza. It is more Arabic. I think the name is Arabic.
Baza.
Baza, I think it's Arab. But my mother's a Herrero, my mother, and actually, my grandfather on my mother's side is actually the grandson of a Spanish governor there. Conga Herrero was a Spanish governor. So my grandfather is the grandson of that governor.
Is this Herrero also related to the Adams?
Yeah,
Okay, so
Joseph Adams' mother is
Yeah.
Herrero.
Herrero also.
Yeah, there are two sons, I think, that the governor had. One is Jose and one is Luis. Joe, I think Jose. I know Joe.
Okay.
Yeah, we're actually cousin Joe. He's on the Luis side, I'm on the Jose. But there were many, many children from these two sons.
Family, yeah.
Oh man. Practically everybody here is a Manly, a Kamingan. They have Herreros with them, because there were a lot of these people born,
But that Herrero is, although it's a common name, it's always a shadow. So
Well, actually, I never really thought
Like,
much about my I mentioned this only because there is a Herrero here who's married to the late Tony Don Guerrero, the Bank of Guam. His
Yeah.
wife is Herrero
I thought
from
his
Spain.
Herrero from
Yeah,
Spain.
yeah.
Okay.
What's her first name? Miraflor.
Yeah.
Miraflor and I talk once in a while, and Miraflor's a little bit. I didn't tell her that. I just told her that my middle name is Herrero,
Yeah.
and I was asking her ancestry. And she said, "Oh, Herrero is very common in Spain." And so I said, Not exactly that common. Maybe your Herrero." I mean, I was kidding her.
But not my Herrero.
Because my great grandfather actually, he was appointed by the monarchy. He was not one of those officers that went to the Philippines and then sent to Guam. No, he came directly from Spain in the 1820s. He was a kind of a well-connected family, and I think they were looking to put somebody in Guam, you know. And but that was the man who came here, and there's quite a few Herreros in there now. So I had one of them.
Right, I just remember him as being an Herrero.
Yeah.
But there's also Herrera.
Yeah, there are Herreras too. A lot of Herreras, I think, from the Philippines. Yeah, most of us really, Elaine, are mixed. We intermarried in Guam. There is no indigenous Chamorro anymore.
No, that's why I'm curious as to why we're still being called Chamorros instead of Guamanians.
We intermarried a lot.
Maybe if you have a little bit of the Chamorro blood, you can still call yourself Chamorro. But if you're not and you're born and raised on Guam, then you're called Guamanian.
I always thought Chamorro was sort of an identity because of our cultural background. But I always thought also that it's important to have an identity because, I live in the States when it was so segregated. And I saw what happened to black people who cannot trace their family to Africa. They can only trace them to a slave camp somewhere in the South. It's horrible what it does to them mentally. And I always thought this is why we Chamorros should not look in any way about our past. We are a product of a very good people that intermarried in the past. And the modern Chamorro actually is of American background, American blood, Spanish blood, Filipino blood, Mexican, not a Mexican. I mean, we're soldiers in Guam. One Peruvian friend of mine from Peru, many Peruvian troops also in the Spanish army. But see, all of Latin America became independent, including Mexico. So what happened? Spain lost money from the colonies, could not pay the payroll here in Guam. And this is when my great-grandfather entered the picture. They said, Don Jose, figure out how to pay the garrison in Guam, and he had to figure out how to pay them. It was very difficult with no money from Spain, only from the Philippines, I think. But the Philippines were taking the money for Guam, I think. But anyway,
I appreciate you coming down, Mr. Baza. I think what we've taped concerning your father.
The least I could do really, I was told, is to say something about my dad, because my father was a very, very private person. My father does not talk a lot about what he did when he was in the Philippines. He never talked about it. I had to buy a book written by a Chamorro, Dr. what's his name, Palomo, autobiography, the founder of the University of Guam. Jose Palomo. He founded that university in 1955.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was the first PhD from Guam, I think.
Really?
He wrote a book about himself and his family. He left Guam not before my father, when he was like 13 years old, like 1912 or something, I don't know. And he studied in the Philippines. So I was reading about where he went to school, so I know where my father, what he saw, what he did. And I found out that this guy he has a nephew here. So after I read this book, I gave it to this nephew, because I thought it was more important. But I was only reading it.
And you found something about your father?
About my father, but he never talked. The only time my father talked about the Philippines was he was so homesick many times. And you've been to Manila, the Manila, there's a big park there, what do you call that park? in Manila. You know, my father said he used to go to this park and he will sit in a chair and he will cry.
Oh.
You know, he said that he missed his mother, you know, something like that. And I said, did you know that when you were looking at that, you were looking at Asia? Guam was behind you. He said, he was right. He looked at the map and it's true.
Yeah.
But when he was there, he didn't know that.
Which way was it?
Yeah, he thought he was facing Guam and he was facing, you know, China. And when he was,
Who was your grandparents, your father's parents?
my grandfather, actually, his name is Luis Martinez Baza. And my grandmother, you know, that, you know, Rosa Camacho. And my grandmother is also Areola Camacho, my grandmother. That's where we got the Camacho. You know, yeah. I don't know if you're interested, but
From Saipan?
I
I'm gonna
think
stop this
all
now.
yeah, I think,
because
yeah.
we're going to family history.
Yeah, and I yeah, might as well, because yeah, you don't want other people to know. You know.